welcome to episode 2 of the Willow Cove Crafts podcast, a podcast about knitting and sewing and my other crafty endeavors. My name is Emily, and you can find me on both Ravelry and Instagram as Willow Cove Crafts. Today is Saturday, April 24th, 2021, and I am coming to you from just outside of Madison in Verona, Wisconsin. It has been about 3 weeks since I last recorded, and it's been a busy few weeks. Busy and not busy. I think I mentioned in my last episode that my boyfriend Dan had to have knee surgery. He tore his ACL during a ski trip in February, and so he had his surgery about 2 weeks ago at this point. And so, he obviously needed help with the surgery and right after, and then he's had a lot of doctor's appointments and PT appointments, and he can't drive, so I've had to take him to those appointments. And so, there's been a lot of things on the schedule, but then once we get there, I just kind of sit. And then obviously, because of the COVID situation, and then on top of that, him being injured, we've been spending a lot of time just hanging out and watching TV. And so I feel like I've gotten a ton of knitting done in the last couple weeks, and I'm super excited to share that with you today. It might sound kind of random, but Dan and his injury has actually caused me to reflect quite a bit on my knitting journey and how I came to be such an obsessive knitter. And since it's been on my mind, I thought it would be a fun story to share with you all. So I started knitting, I believe I was 19 years old. I think it was the summer between my freshman and sophomore year of college. I had a friend who really loved to knit, and she was constantly knitting when we were hanging out together and with our other friends. And, I've always really liked making things. And so I asked her to teach me, which of course she did. And so I learned some simple knit stitch from her. And I made a garter stitch scarf, which I no longer have. I gave it away because I never wore it because it was not that great. It was definitely very tight at one end, and then as I kind of relaxed and got used to things, my tension relaxed a little bit, and it kind of made this very tapered edge. And it was kind of cheap yarn I got from some big box store, and I just at some point never wore it, so I gave it away. Anyways, I from there kind of just knit on and off. I think I was a very adventurous beginner. I was not afraid to try patterns, and then she taught me how to purl, and from there, YouTube has always been a great resource. If I was following a pattern and didn't know a technique, I would just go look it up and watch a video, and then I was good to go. So, one of my first projects was a brioche cowl, because I didn't know that brioche was supposed to be challenging, and I just followed the instructions and watched a video and got it done. And I would say at that time I was not a knitter with a capital K. I would knit pretty regularly, but definitely not every day. Just kind of here and there as I felt like it. And I had a lot of other stuff going on. I was very active in college. I did a lot of running. I played a lot of ultimate frisbee. So I had a lot of things going on. I was in school, I was working. And so knitting was just kind of a secondary hobby. And then, what really changed that, I think, was when I was a senior in college, I tore my ACL. And that again ties back to Dan currently and the surgery he just had. I also had that same injury and had to have that same surgery. And given kind of how like social and active I was at that time, it was really upsetting to, kind of be cooped up for a couple weeks. And so I decided that following my surgery, I was going to tackle a couple big challenges. At that point, I had never knit a shawl and I had never knit a sweater. And so I prepared myself. I went to my local yarn shop and got some yarn to make my first sweater and to make my first shawl. And that's what I did. I had surgery. I sat on the couch for a month and a half, nearly straight, just getting up to like go to the bathroom and shower. And I knit. And, it got me through that time where I was unable to do some of the other things that I really enjoyed. And it was around that time I discovered, not YouTube podcasts, but I found the Never Not Knitting audio podcast, and I listened. At that point she had like over 50 episodes out, and so I listened to all of them. In listening to her, that's how I discovered Ravelry, and that just like opened the floodgates. Before I discovered Ravelry, I was knitting patterns that I had exclusively found on, I think it was linebrand.com, Line Brand being the yarn brand that you might see at like Michael's or Hobby Lobby. And nothing wrong with those patterns, but it was like a very limited selection. And so then finding Ravelry and seeing, all of this stuff and all of these independent designers and just everything that was out there, and like listening to podcasts and learning about different yarns, and it just created a monster. And now I knit obsessively whenever I can. And especially now, since we're sitting at home and Dan has had knee surgery. So it's kind of fun to reflect on that and, kind of how I had a similar experience and it led to this. And I am so thankful. I love knitting. It brings so much joy to my life. That being said, let's get into some knitting content. I have a finished object this week, and it's one I'm super excited about because it's kind of big. I showed this on my last episode, but I finished my Rayna shawl. And there she is. It's gorgeous. I love it so much. Again, I think this worked really well with my quilt last week, but I really like the idea of showing how I might wear a knit object, especially shawls. I often hear people question, how do I wear a shawl, in a way that looks a bit more modern maybe. And so I took some video footage and I will insert it here of maybe a couple different ways that I would wear this shawl. So again, this is the Rayna Shaw pattern by Andrea Mowry, otherwise known as Drea Renee Knits. And it is a very long, kind of shallow crescent shape shawl. And for the most part, it alternates between striped garter and then this 2-color brioche. And then you've got short rows that make it, this really interesting shape where it's, quite long at one end. You could kind of think of this white section as the middle point. And then we've obviously got like these very short, shallow sections over here. And then they're really long over here. And that is accomplished with short rows. And then I think, what really makes this shawl pop is the border, which is also brioche. It is an applied border and, it kind of looks like this very graphic arrow pattern. And I'm obsessed with it. I love it. It's unfortunate that it's getting warmer out because now I have to wait a couple months to wear it. I'm not knocking the warmer weather. I actually love the warmer weather, but it does kind of put a damper on my knitting game. The yarn I used for this shawl is the yarn that's called for in the pattern, which is Brooklyn Tweed Loft. Here is the label. And I used the colorways Fossil, which is the white, and Ember. I think it's Embers, which is the orange. And together, I think they are just magical. I was kind of like reorganizing my stash a little bit, and I think I have quite a few projects where I pair like a white or a cream with a burnt orange. I love this color combination, it would seem. The pattern calls for 3 skeins of each color. And as you can see, I had quite a bit left over. I would say I barely broke into the orange. I was probably, I had knit the entire border up to about here. And then I started the 3rd skein of the orange. The white you use a little bit more because you have this initial white section up here. But lots of leftovers. I might make a hat with this. I think it would be really fun to do kind of a coordinating brioche hat. I probably would never wear them together, but I just love this yarn and this color combination so much that I think that would be a fun addition. This was my first time knitting with Brooklyn Tweed, and I did express in my last video that I had some reservations. I do want to show you this. I'm sure you've seen this before, but Brooklyn Tweed Loft is a fingering weight yarn, and it is woolen spun, I believe. There's worsted spun and woolen spun, and I get them confused because, they're kind of similar words, obviously. But when it's woolen spun, it puts a lot of air into the yarn, and Loft especially will just break so easily. I, barely tugged on that and it came apart. And so I was really nervous, and I'm still really nervous about, the longevity of this shawl, and, if I catch it on something, or like where the border is attached, it's, quite holy. I hope you can see that. You can kind of see my finger behind there. And, even in trying it on, I felt like I had to be really careful that my finger didn't get stuck into one of those holes and rip it. But I think that's just something I'm going to have to be cognizant of when I'm wearing this shawl, is that I'm really careful with it and that I don't snag it on anything. The other thing that I was really surprised about with Brooklyn Tweed, and I've heard other people say this, and so I was expecting it, but still, you know, I never experienced it for myself. Pleasantly surprised. The yarn in the cake is like very rustic. It's a rustic yarn. It's a bit crunchy. It feels a bit spongy. It's a very interesting texture, different than any other yarn I have ever worked with. But then when you wash it, it like blooms and it softens up. And this, you know, it's still rustic, but it is so soft and squishy. I'm just so pleased. The other thing I wanted to quick mention about this shawl was needle management. Brioche short rows is an interesting adventure in needle management. If you're familiar with the brioche stitch, you essentially knit each row twice. The first pass, you knit every other stitch in one color, and then the second pass, you knit the stitches you didn't knit in your second color. And in short rows, you're only working partway down the way. And so, you know, again, if you're familiar with brioche, you know, there's a lot of sliding that happens, and then that gets very difficult to do in a short row. It's really hard to explain without a demonstration, but I'm hoping some of you maybe understand what I mean. So if you're gonna knit this shawl, I definitely recommend having 2 sets of needles. Because of those brioche sections, I did use 2 circular needles. I would kind of knit my short row in the first color, and then I would use my second needle to knit my short row in the second color, and then keep repeating. So I was using 2 needles throughout the brioche sections. And then also, similar thing for the border's brioche as well, and I found that it was easier to use a double point needle in the size that I needed, so that I can do the necessary, you know, slide back to the beginning that you have to do with brioche. So hopefully that kind of makes sense for those of you out there that are familiar with how brioche works. And then lastly, I wanted to say that I really enjoyed this shawl. It was quite a labor of love, especially the border. The border took forever. I worked on this border not quite monogamously, but a lot, for about a week. And it slowly but surely got finished. I'm really happy with this shawl. I think it's gonna be a staple. And I think it goes really well with black, which is my favorite shirt color. Next up, we have knitting works in progress. I mentioned this last episode, but I'm trying this new system of only having 3 knitting projects on the go at a time: a sock, an accessory, and a sweater. So I still have my same pair of socks and sweater as last time, so I will start by showing you those. First up are my socks. This is the second sock. I put a marker on last episode, but last episode I was just about to start the toe of the first sock, and since then I've knit that toe and I'm getting pretty close to being done with the pair. The yarn I am using is Scrumptiouspurl in her Stripe Me Up base, which is an 80/20 superwash merino nylon blend, and it is in her Bushel and a Peck colorway. I have tons of self-striping yarn in my stash. I love a pair of stripy socks. I almost always use the How I Make My Socks pattern by Susan B. Anderson. Even if I knit a textured pair of socks, I will take the textured pattern and impose it on this pattern. It's my favorite. I love the way it fits, but it's a 64 stitch sock, heel flap and gusset. Yes, even with self-striping, I don't think it, ruins things too much or makes your stripes too skinny. And then with self-striping yarn, I really like it when my socks match, and I have a couple techniques I use to get them pretty close, even the heels. Lots of yarn management to make sure that they end up looking identical. But yeah, here are my socks. I am really hoping to finish these by next episode so that I can cast on a new pair. Next up is my sweater project. As with last episode, I am still working on the Sumac sweater by Orlane Sucche, I believe is how you pronounce it. I am using Cascade 220 for this sweater. I had a couple comments about Cascade that I talked about in my last episode, so I encourage you to go check that out if you are curious. But Cascade is a worsted weight, 100% Peruvian Highland wool, and the colorway I am using is, I forget the number, 8418, which is the Eggplant colorway. And I've made quite a bit of progress since last episode. I put a marker on to show you where I left off, but here's my little macaroon stitch marker from Sucre Miniatures. But last episode, I was just about to split for the sleeves. And since then, I have done so and am now working down the body. This sweater features some textured panels along, do you call it a yoke for a raglan sweater? I'm very curious if a yoke is, obviously it's like a circular yoke, but do you also call a raglan top a yoke? I would be curious if anyone knows the answer to that, just so I can use the correct terminology. But it has these different textured panels, and then that transitions into this, I believe they call it the broken lines stitch pattern, and that will continue for the rest of the body. The sweater calls for a 10.5-inch body, I believe, before you start the ribbing. I tend to nearly always lengthen my sweaters. I'm pretty tall, I'm 5'9", and so a lot of measurements with sweaters, at least when you're talking about the length of the sweater, are often too short for me. And so I almost always, especially with this being kind of an oversized sweater, I really want it to be big and cozy, and so I'll probably end up knitting maybe like 16 inches before I start the ribbing. I tend to like my body, like from armpit to the end of the sweater, to be about 8 inches, not 8 inches, 18 inches. If it's gonna be a big oversized sweater, I feel like that tends to hit me where I want it to. And then once I'm done with the body, I'll pick up the collar and knit some ribbing at the top, and then I will do the sleeves, which I'm actually really looking forward to doing the sleeves on this sweater because I'm obsessed with the stitch pattern. I don't know what it is. I just love this like very linear vertical stitch pattern. I think it looks great. The sleeves on this sweater are part of the reason I wanted to make it. I think it looks really cool. Kind of a funny story with this sweater that I wanted to share. So this is 100% wool, so you can splice it. For those of you that aren't aware, instead of joining a new ball of yarn and having some ends that you have to weave in, you can actually take 100% animal fiber get it wet and rub it between your hands and it will felt together. And then you don't have any ends. You can pretty seamlessly join your new ball. And so yesterday I took Dan to his doctor's appointment, one of his doctor's appointments, and I was sitting in the waiting room at the doctor and it was time to join a new ball. And I did not have any water with me. And so, you know, a lot of you might know this, but you can also use spit. And, you know, I prefer to use water, but you gotta do what you gotta do in a time of need. And so I, you know, prepped my yarn, and then I was sitting in the waiting room and I had my mask on, obviously, and I just like kind of like pulled my mask forward and just stuck the yarn under my mask and got it all slobbered up so that I could felt it together. And I was laughing to myself because it probably looked really weird. I tried to be discreet. I hope no one saw me, but I can only imagine if they did that it would be a very weird sight for someone who was not familiar with the properties of wool and that you can felt it together to continue your yarn. So again, that's the Sumac sweater, and I'm really enjoying how it is coming together. A quick note on sizing, because people often don't mention their size. I have a about 44-inch bust, and this sweater calls for about 8 inches of positive ease. So I'm knitting the extra large, which ends up being 50.5 inches. And I tried it on last night and it's fitting perfectly. I'm really happy with how it's turning out. Next up, because I finished my Rayna Shawl, I was ready to start a new accessory project. And I mentioned this quite a bit last time, but I have a ton of unfinished works in progress just kind of sitting in a sad pile in my closet, and I really want to get back to some of those. I mean, all of them eventually, but you know, I'm trying to like, you know, finish something and then maybe pick up one of those projects and then maybe I can cast on something new. So just like trying to work them in. And so when I finished the Raina, I thought, you know, I'll go pick something out of my pile. I'll be good and not cast on something new. I'll finish something that's already started. And I wanted something that was going to kind of be a quick win, something that was close to being done. And I looked through the pile and found the perfect candidate. I am knitting the Cucho scarf by We Are Knitters, and I will show you that. And the reason this is a quick win is because it is super chunky. I have it kind of rolled up in a little snail, but here's how it's going. The yarn I am using is the wool by We Are Knitters. It is a super bulky 100% wool, and I am using the Salmon colorway. And I actually purchased this as a kit from We Are Knitters. I saw on Ravelry or Instagram, one of the two, someone had knit this scarf, and I don't know if she just took amazing and beautiful pictures, but I was obsessed with it and had to make one for myself. So I went and bought the kit. The pattern comes with the kit, the yarn comes with the kit, needles come with the kit. The needles are these 15mm We Are Knitters wooden needles, and I think these are the most hilarious needles I've ever seen. They look like drumsticks. They're huge. I don't know what I'm gonna do with them when I'm done with this scarf. Maybe just use them as a decoration. I don't really see myself ever using them again, but they are quite cute. And again, the scarf is pretty simple. It's just a seed stitch pattern but the yarn is like so soft and thick and squishy, and because of that, it's knitting up super quickly. I feel like every row adds like a half an inch to the scarf. And so it uses 3 balls of the yarn. This is my 3rd one, and I'm just gonna keep knitting until it is finished, or until I use all of the yarn. So yeah, I am also hoping to have this done by next episode. I think, you know, this is really close to being done. I feel like a couple of hours and I'll knit through this whole ball of yarn. And then maybe I'll also finish my socks for next episode. So then I'll have a couple new projects, a couple finished objects, and a couple new cast-ons to show you. So that brings us to the end of our knitting content today, and we will move on to sewing. I am continuing to work on my Little Miss Sawtooth Star quilt by Southern Charm Quilts. I did not get as much sewing in the last couple weeks as I would have liked. Again, I've been spending a lot of time with Dan at his place, and my sewing machine lives at my place, and so I didn't have my sewing machine with me a lot over the last few weeks, but I did manage to make a few blocks, which I will share with you. I am using, I believe all of the fabrics are Art Gallery fabrics. And again, the blocks are Sawtooth quilt blocks, but the centers of each of the blocks are different. So it's this fun sampler type quilt. And it's allowing me to try out a lot of really fun new techniques because I am more of a novice quilter at this point. But I will go ahead and show you. I got 4 new blocks done since last episode. So we've got this one. I love this polka dot fabric. I don't know if you can really tell on the screen, but those polka dots are kind of metallic-y. Super fun. I did this one. This one, which is probably my favorite of the week. I did some fussy cutting and got that nice flower in the center, which I love. And this one. So I will keep chugging away at that. I've gotten 8 out of 15 sawtooths done. So I've got 7 more to do, and then I have to do the background of the quilt. So you've got your like stars, and that's every other block, and then the blocks in between are these like 4 quadrant blocks in the low volume fabrics. So I'll have to do that, and then it'll be time to assemble them. So I think that project's gonna be going on for a while, but I'm making steady progress on it, and it's really fun. I love that the centers are all different and that every block is, you know, a new thing to try. The other thing I'm starting to think about is how I want to quilt the Sawtooth Star quilt. I am very far off from quilting it. I'm not anywhere close to being ready for that, but I am kind of contemplating if I want to do an overall pattern or if I want to be a little more creative and maybe do some something special on each of the stars as opposed to like an all over pattern. So let me know your thoughts on that if you think anything of that. My biggest drawback is I'm a new quilter. My first quilt that I did last week, quilting it was not as neat as I would have liked. I'm not quite used to, you know, maneuvering it through the machine, and so doing something a little more complicated seems a bit scary to me, but have to try it at some point. So let me know your thoughts. I'd be curious. And that is everything that I have been working on the last couple weeks. I am hoping to podcast again in about 2 weeks, 3 at the most, but I'm aiming for 2 weeks. Like I mentioned, am really hoping to get my socks and my scarf finished. And when those are done, I'll be ready to start some new things. So I did want to share with you real quick what I think is going to be on the needles next, because I will hopefully have started these projects by next episode. So first is socks. I think next up I'm going to knit a pair of socks for my sister for Christmas. I really like to be ahead of schedule for Christmas. I don't love being stressed about gift knitting and getting things done on time. So even though it's only April, I think I'm going to start those. My sister Amy really loves hand knit socks, so I think that would be, you know, an awesome Christmas gift. It always is. So I went and picked out some yarn that I think she'll really like. And again, it's super summery. I'm in a really like bright socks kind of mood. But this is 3 Irish girls in the Baby I'm a Star colorway. And, you know, not set in stone, but I think this is what I'm going to use for Christmas socks. I'm thinking about doing a pair of textured socks, but I'm not quite sure which ones I will do. So more details next time. And then if I finish my scarf, I think what's going to be next up are a few other gift knits. I have a couple of friends who are having baby girls this summer and fall. And, you know, obviously we have to knit the little babies something to keep them warm. And I have been really obsessed. I believe it's called the Lorna bonnet or something like that by Stitched in Sweden. It's this super cute little pixie bonnet. It's got some simple color work and it's got like a cute little pom-pom on the top. I think it's the most adorable thing I've ever seen. So I'll probably be knitting 2 of those. I have 2 little girls that need bonnets for the winter time because we live in Wisconsin. So I think for my friend that's having her baby in July, I'm gonna use this color combination. And I'll talk more about these yarns next time, but I picked out these. And then for my friend who's having her baby in, I believe she's due in September or October, I think I will use this color combination. All leftovers, but the perfect amount to make some little hats for some little babies. And I think that is it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. If this is your first time, welcome. If it's, you know, your second time for my second episode, thank you so much for returning. I really appreciate your support. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe, and I will chat with you again in a few weeks. Bye, everyone.